All right, folks. Justin, if we're good, I'm just going to start up.
You go.
Excellent. Hi, folks. This is John Patton. I go by JP. I'm one of DCR's staff archaeologists. I'm here with you on a balmy Sunday afternoon. Thanks, everybody, for attending. I know we have some folks live and some folks virtual. So why don't we just hold our questions till the end? I got about 24 slides here, so we'll go through a bit about DCR's Office of Cultural Resources, and then address our cultural resources and stewardship, and then have a little chat. Hopefully, folks will be able to get their questions either into the chat virtually or can relay through Nancy in a live fashion, and I'll try my best to answer them. This is the volume that we have, unfortunately, today, so hope everybody can hear me. So I just always like to start with a reminder of DCR's mission to to protect, promote, and enhance our commonwealth of natural, cultural, and recreational resources for the well-being of all. Uh, so we have a big part of the cultural resource protection mission here, and we work with everybody in the DCR family, especially our water supply folks in their multiple watersheds who have a whole lot of cultural resources that are really wonderful. I always love working with them. So pull back a little bit, and for those that aren't familiar with all of what DCR is, we're over 500,000 acres of stewarded lands and waters in the Commonwealth. We have stuff in virtually every city and town in the Commonwealth, 351 of them, and each one of these properties has its own unique history. And here's just a quick slide kind of overview of what DCR actually is. It's an amalgamation of several different agencies from the 1890s, and we have our fingers in a whole lot of things above and beyond the water supply mission. So we have forestry, climate resilience, our own cultural resources, natural resources, our water supply, dam protection, waterways, stormwater, construction, conservation restrictions, land acquisition, park operations, long-term leases and permits, and all sorts of government affairs and public access related things. So there's a lot of folks doing a lot of things, and we try to intersect across our divisions as much as possible. Our cultural resource office has stewardship over a lot of historic properties. This includes the built environment and our archaeological resources, which are coming from over 12,000 years of folks doing things in the Commonwealth. Indigenous history is a deep piece of our stewardship responsibilities, and working with our tribal partners is a growing mission. We actually have an Indigenous partnership coordinator who's been on staff now for 2 years, and these relationships are growing very smoothly, hopefully. But it is a big part of our mission uh, to eventually, hopefully, get to a co-stewardship situation with our tribal communities. So the reason why everybody showed up today, hopefully, this is my working definition of cultural resources. So we're thinking about non-renewable material evidence of our past relationships to the lands and waters of Massachusetts. This is multi-generationally. This is a lot of folks doing a lot of different things over a long time period. And so starting with a positive mindset here, we really think about four things in terms of how we think about cultural resource stewardship. We think about educating ourselves as to what cultural resources are, where they're found, how can we respect them, how can we connect to them, and then how our office, at least, hopefully can work with all our partners and continue to support the conservation mission. So education, I like to think about this in a dual way. You know, with most things in life, it seems like there's a hard way and there's a soft way. I would really like to put out there today that the soft way seems to get you further because you can always come up against the hard way. But the soft way tends to be a happier, more positive approach. So what this means for our cultural resource stewardship mission is growing respect and connection in collaboration, thinking bigger, thinking and pulling back and thinking we are a commonwealth. We're all connected here. We all live in this state. We all have individual family, city, town, and regional connections to the folks that we see in this generation and to folks in past generations and to folks in future generations. All our material culture that's preserved in the state, parks, forests, and reservations and beaches, I like to think about it as collaborative. Excuse me. So this is a product of everyone that's ever lived in the state, and we hope to keep it in trust and stewardship for everyone. This is our preservation mission during our generation. We're just the staff that has the technical approach to the material culture, but we don't own it. We're just stewarding it during this generation. So we try to practice a conservation and preservation ethic here. Because we know these things are non-renewable, we only get one chance with them typically. So disturbance of material culture really is about stories. It's about connections of generations in the past and hopefully preserving them to tell to our kids and grandkids and in indigenous approaches 7 generations into the future at least. So if we disturb our material culture in ways where we can't preserve the stories, then we've kind of lost our history a little bit. We've lost our connections. Or we could go the hard way. Cultural resources are protected by multiple laws and regulations. It's really not positive to have negative interactions with our environmental police or our park rangers and create relationships of mistrust. Nobody wants that. Everybody's hopefully here to enjoy our places and spaces, if not together, at least generally respecting of other people's approach to be on the same lands and waters. So the hard way is really not how we like to do things. So I'm generally thinking about this in terms of folks think about stuff. I'll get into what that means a little more in the next couple of slides, but basically, because we're talking about non-renewable culture resources, we only get one chance to do good work. Thinking multi-generationally, as I indicated, and these things are unique. These are unique resources. They're snapshots in story time is really how I like to think about it. So we like to think about it in terms of our word, our internal jargon is artifacts. Indigenous folks talk about these as creations. Basically the stuff, the material culture, the things that you may be able to hold in your hand that are portable. We think about those as artifacts of people doing stuff in the past. Then we think about the artifacts connected to their place in the ground or underwater, above and below ground features. So these are examples of these would be stone walls, cellar holes, all sorts of other built environmental features that we have in a lot of our parks, forests, and reservations. And then the natural and environmental intersections of people doing things tend to look like soil deposits, basically cultural subsurface features that are connecting the artifacts to what was going on in that place and that time and that space in a particular way. So I want to put this out there early. Metal detecting kind of makes me sad. I know that's a very popular hobby, and metal detecting does have a place in archaeological research designs. And so I just want to speak to that really specifically here. So if we take all the metal artifacts out of the ground, we still have a lot of other material culture typically that's connected to people doing things in a specific way in a specific place. So we're removing a lot of the story, and the metal has a connection to its environment. It has more or less stabilized in most soils here. So you pull it out of the environment in the soil, you reintroduce it to air, it starts to rust again. And that happens really quickly, and eventually the metal items will just disintegrate. And so taking the metal out just by itself, it really takes away a lot of the potential story that can be told in a specific place, because the metals are just one of the types of artifacts that are connected to soil features, architecture, and subsurface soil deposits. So when we do archaeology, we dig systematically when we need to. We try really hard not to, because as I'll talk about in a second, archaeology is also destruction in and of itself, and we only get one chance. So when we need to dig, we dig systematically. This is an example of one of our shovel test pits that we do. These are 50 by 50 centimeter squares. They're kind of like mini telephone booths that we dig into the ground. You see we have arrows, north arrows, scales, and descriptions in all our photographs because this is the only information we get after we dig these soil layers. They're all disturbed now. So we record all the information possible. So here is an example of what I'm talking about in terms of artifacts. Anything pretty much made or used by people. The things, as I said, are really only half the story. And artifacts can be created, curated, and repurposed over time. So the fact that we find really old material culture, for example, in a younger place, tells us a story about what those folks were considering important. Maybe this was something that was connected to their ancestors that is really old, that has a family story to it, that was handed down, and that was curated into a much younger time. Archaeological features are all these things that are associated with folks doing stuff on the landscape. I have here an example of some historical ones. The one in the middle is an ancient Native American shell midden. Often we find these eroding in situations where we have active slopes being cut. And this is a big issue with climate change that we're trying to address statewide. But each of these things is telling a story in coordination with what we know from the historical documents. For example, the quarries were used for very specific purposes, for very specific times. Dams, as folks probably know, a lot of folks are wanting to get rid of the dams. These dams are really important stories in the history of how folks relate to their water here in the state. And a lot of them are really critical to the stories of how towns were formed and maintained, and businesses and all sorts of economic history. This coal ash deposit, for example, is associated with one of our many military installations that DCR is responsible for stewarding. It's identified here in a shovel test pit. Here's some examples just for visual understanding of what we mean by historical landscapes and above ground features. Uh, we have all sorts of things associated with all the periods from the 1600s all the way through the Cold War military era in the DCR parks and forests. And we work with these things as we find them. And because we know they're non-renewable, we have best practices that I'll show in a little that we would apply in each of these situations because each of these things has unique environmental connections to it and unique histories. Here's more or less of an example of what I mean by subsurface cultural soils as well. This is all the rest of the landscape around these archaeological features. And they have a lot of other environmental knowledge. In some cases, we do specialized analyses and sampling to connect these real specific locations in with the bigger histories of human occupation and natural change in our environments. This is a lot of what goes on in our forests out west. Here's just an example of some of our bigger historical landscapes. As I mentioned, we have a lot of military resources. Fort Warren on George's Island, the Boston Harbor Islands is a heavy concentration of all of these things. We have historical garden landscapes. We have historical industrial landscapes and everything in between. Again, we practice a conservation ethic. We find these things where they are and try to maintain them in their appropriate understanding of how they were built. And all these things have archaeological subsurface resources associated with them. So in terms of the architecture is always coordinated with the archaeology. Here's another important thing that comes up for folks. Bones. What do? We keep calm and carry on. Typically, what we would do is work with our DCR staff first. In the case of human bones, everybody usually gets really excited, and that's actually not really helpful. There is a process in place that DCR would follow in these cases. There are a lot of other folks that would typically get involved here, and I can speak to this more specifically, but I just wanted to put this out there is that don't freak out. Just call out your local DCR staff and we can sort it out if this ever comes up. So coming around to support, what can you do to be a good cultural resources steward while enjoying our places and spaces? Pretty straightforward. Stay on the trails, tread lightly, leave that stuff alone. If you see really interesting stuff, we're a resource here for you. Feel free to take a picture and send it along to us. I love working with anybody and everybody as they're out enjoying these places and spaces. It helps us to do our big mission here. We really don't have a comprehensive archaeological survey of all of DCR properties yet. It's an ongoing mission to get archaeological reconnaissance surveys done for all our parks and forests and reservations. Many many big, really interesting, deep histories in a lot of these places that will take years, unfortunately, to unpack. So we would look to our patrons and our partners to help us here if they see things or if they see folks doing things that maybe aren't super positive, please reach out. Here are the best management practices that I mentioned. This is right up on DCR website. This is mostly for our staff, but I'm bringing it up here for you all as these are kind of our benchmark in terms of how we approach a lot of these different types of cultural resources. As I mentioned, each place has a history, each structure, feature, artifact in and of itself has many histories, and we meet these things where they are in most places. So I encourage folks to take a look at these and reach out if they have particular questions. I know folks are really interested in certain particular places that they frequent, and they likely come across one or more of these types of resources in their daily rambles. So if you do take a picture, happy to send it along, but please include something in it for scale. A picture of the woods is really wonderful, uh, but if we don't know where we're looking, the direction of the photo, for example, and the location from where the photo was taken, uh, folks would more or less have access in most places to some sort of mapping application on their phones these days, or even an old school paper map. Just make a record of it and send it along. I'm certainly happy to engage. Our contact information for myself and our other Jonathan Ruane, is below here. And all our Quabbin folks have it as well. They know where to find us if that's something that comes up. So I encourage folks coming down to the end of this, reach out to your local historical commission or society or the Friends group. Ask them to work with our office. We love partnerships. We love to support local preservation initiatives. I can also give folks, there's a lot of online historical resources particular to regions and cities and towns. I didn't want to do a deep dive into it here, but I can certainly recommend if folks are interested in particular places and particular time periods. There is a lot of information out there between our office, the State Historic Preservation Office, and Massachusetts Historical Commission curates a lot of information, and a lot of the cities and towns have very active local partnerships. The Swiss River Historical Society in the Quabbin is a really wonderful resource for that neighborhood. But similar things are going on within all the rest of the state. All right, let's go to questions.
I don't believe anything has come in over Zoom, but I'm going to allow all the participants to unmute themselves. And so I think if anyone has a question, they can ask it. And Nancy, if anything has come in from the audience, you can unmute yourself and pass that on. Looks like Christopher Mills may have a question.
I just wanted to point out, at least on my end, chat appears to be disabled.
Oh, sorry about that.
And I do have a question.
Sure, Chris.
Hi, Jonathan. I'm just curious about some of the watershed tree harvesting operations that I see happening, thinking
Yep.
particularly up on Jucket Hill. Are those tracts of forest surveyed for cultural resources before the big skidders move in?
Yeah, so this is an active part of one of our roles is the environmental review and compliance function of our office. We work with the DCR forestry, the watershed foresters. When they publish all their cut plans for a given year and a given cycle, we take a look at those. There's a set of best management practices that we hope are employed to avoid and minimize ground impacts for where those skid roads are going, to try to do it during the winter to, minimize disturbance of the ground because we don't have actually a comprehensive, up-to-date archaeological reconnaissance survey of all the watershed lands at this point. We're trying to kind of do both, if you will, while these plans are being created so that the contractors that are used are well briefed before they get out there.
Thank you.
Nothing else on my end at this point. Um,
Nancy, anyone in the audience?
And the Sunhole still intact. The only way I can find
Hold on.
information about it is to go to the old county atlases
Mhm.
of the 1840s, 1860s. And one particular soil I thought was very unique is all the way from gate 12 down to Pelham Hall.
Just going to pause you for one moment so I can tell them what's going on in case they
Okay.
can't hear you. Yeah, so we've got someone who's talking about a cellar hole that predates the Quabbin
Mhm.
inside gate 12. And did you have a question about it or were you just?
Or to get more information about this unique cellar hole. The only thing I could find was on the atlas from 1860, whatever it was.
Okay.
Hutchinson.
So he's wondering if there's any resources available to find out information about those pre-Quabbin cellar holes, other than those old maps and atlases that you find from like the 1890s that occasionally have
Yep.
this information on it. Do you have any other information on that?
So for that particular location, I'd have to orient myself and do the research. So we have an archaeological survey from the 1990s for the good majority of Quabbin. I don't know if that particular location is marked as an individual historical archaeological site or not. If you wanna reach out to me, I'm certainly happy to do the back research and get you more information. Typically for Quabbin, we have our own cultural resource GIS system. The Quabbin folks, you all have several different data layers that speak from the acquisition of these parcels, often in 1920s, 1930s, that show the history of who was there at the time of the taking. And then typically you would work backwards. I would probably do some historical deed research to accompany the historical maps analysis to trace the history of that parcel back into the 1700s in certain cases to understand who was there. And a lot of the deeds probably do speak to a certain amount of architecture on the property. At least in the 1800s, the deeds are usually pretty good about saying, a house and a barn and outbuildings, and giving meets and bounds of the original parcel that would speak to what that cellar hole is at this point. That obviously takes some research, takes some time and a little bit of elbow grease for each of these locations. So we probably have that cellar hole mapped already in one or more of our GIS inventories at this point. But if we're not doing any projects near it, we would just leave it alone. We would know that it was there, and then check it out periodically, but not really have any active management of a particular resource like that.
Mike, Justin,
Jonathan.
I'll reach out to you and send you the location from the DCR
Excellent.
map and pictures that I've taken. It's probably one of the most well-preserved, some of
Mhm.
unique rock features. And that's just, I was totally blown away by how well it's still intact. And the only reason why was it was predates the Quabbin construction, where they just basically bulldozed and some of the houses they tore down.
Okay.
Yeah, those inventories are typically, as I mentioned, kept by city and town. So I know because the Quabbin boundary towns change slightly in certain places, you might have to look at one or more town histories to get really at the research of that particular location. I don't know without seeing the location at this point. So yes, please follow up and we can get you what you need, or at least as much as we have at this point.
Okay, I'll reach out to you. Thank you.
Anyone else have questions in here?
I can kind of address this question a little bit. I'm an archaeologist. I've worked JP and DCR in the past. And, there is a thing called the Digital Commonwealth that is online. And if you look under, I believe, Quabbin realty photos or Quabbin appraisal photos.
They have the photograph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Standing.
I'm just going to interject because he's asking about the buildings that were gone before the Quabbin, so that we don't have the information on. So those wouldn't be on the digital
I was
Commonwealth.
going to point out is not all the cellar holes were filled in.
True.
When they built the Quabbin, some of them were, the houses were just taken down, or sometimes they were burned on site, and they put they let the burn material fall into the cellar, and it's just sitting there ever since. So a lot of times, the ones that are well above water, a lot of them were not graded and filled at all. A lot of them are still there. So that might be one that actually was still standing. And the nice thing about those photos is you're getting an idea of what the building looked like.
Oh, yeah.
It was on top of it. So you shouldn't necessarily assume that they were all bulldozed, because I know a lot of them are not.
Okay.
If you go to Dana Center, there's a lot of Dana Center that were taken down, but you can see the cellar holes.
Yeah.
Is that you, John Wilson?
Yeah, it is.
Hey, John, good to see you. Thanks for coming.
If we here live, we could catch up more.
Yeah, excellent. So yeah, as John mentions, Digital Commonwealth is a really wonderful resource. A lot of the images on that are taken from the takings when they did demolish a lot of these locations. They took up many photos, typically of the existing conditions of them, so you get a really good angle to what the architecture was at a given time usually in the around 1930, 32, what a lot of these historical farmsteads did look like. And we do have one of the Quabbin inventories is directly linked, so that you click on a parcel and you get the Digital Commonwealth images to pop up, which is really, really helpful.
Yeah, we use that out in the field when we're hiking. We use the field map.
Yep.
And it gives our location, and it'll show us what cultural resources are in our vicinity. And like you said, and if we're lucky, the one we're looking at will have a picture associated. Take a look at the picture and see what it looked like that before during the appraisal.
Exactly. Yeah, I always point to the way that you all have done this. This is like the most wonderful thing that I really would hope that we have for all our DCR parks and forests, because we don't have that standard of documentation that can be used live in that way yet for the rest of the DCR facilities that you all have for Quabbin. It's really wonderful to be able to do that in the field.
So was that a collaborative project between DCR, Quabbin, and UMass, the GIS department?
It started with the 1990s archaeology that was done by UMass for DCR, for the water supply folks. And then the Digital Commonwealth has been collecting all that information separately, and then the DCR GIS folks reconnected it.
It's a wonderful resource for us lay people who are not archaeologists. Just appreciate what we're looking at.
Yeah, I usually just recommend that if you're looking at a particular place, you start with Digital Commonwealth because it's a little more accessible than our online GIS, which is through Mass GIS, and the layers are out there.
Yeah.
But it's a little wonkier for most folks to look at. So Digital Commonwealth is a lot more accessible.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else need to ask a question? All right. JP, I think we're all set on questions here. Thank you very much. This has been great.
All right. Well, thank you all here, and glad to know that John was able to attend today. So we'll circle back with folks that are interested. Please reach out if you have further questions.
You.